All right, so you want to dive into a case, huh? This one takes us deep into the world of competitive dog training. It's intense, high stakes, and, well, this one involves a shocking murder that really gripped a small Ontario town.
Oh yeah, this one's a wild ride.
It really is. So you all asked for a deep dive on RV, redacted, and that's what we're doing today, going way beyond those headlines.
Right into the thick of it.
Exactly. We're going through court transcripts, the judges' decisions, the nitty-gritty details, all to figure out how a well-known dog trainer ends up accused of murder.
It's a story you won't believe.
Oh, you better believe it. So the victim, we'll call him Mr. Smith, was a big deal in competitive dog training. September 13th, 2014, he's found dead, shot, multiple times.
Yeah.
And his wife, she was there too, injured. Just awful. And the location, a quiet road in Hullett, Ontario, right in the middle of their annual fall field dog trials.
So already we're talking about a high-pressure environment.
Exactly. And to really get what went down, we got to grasp how intense this world is.
It's serious business.
Yeah.
This isn't just some casual dog park. These folks, they're at the championship level. The time, the resources, the sheer dedication, it creates this whole other level of, well, passion.
But like you said, it's serious, big stakes.
And with those stakes, yeah, you get rivalries,
Mm-hmm.
fierce ones. And that's where our accused, Mr. Jones, comes in. Another big name in dog training. He actually used to work with Mr. Smith, the victim.
So there's history there.
Oh, yeah. And where there's history, there's often, shall we say, baggage. Rumors of a grudge, whispers of past conflicts. All of that gets amplified under the microscope of a murder investigation.
Right from the start, the judge is digging into Mr. Jones's past in this world. It's clear this wasn't just a hobby for him, it was his life.
Consumed by it almost. And this is where it gets interesting, because the prosecution really painted a picture of a man obsessed. We're talking custom license plates.
Yeah.
2 Nat CH for his 2 national championships.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, plastered that everywhere. Social media, you name it. Trophies, front and center.
Yeah.
This was a guy who clearly thrived on that recognition.
So we have someone who really, really cares about his legacy, his success, that kind of thing.
Exactly. And, that desire for recognition, for a legacy, it cuts both ways. On one hand, you've got pride in your accomplishments, which is great. But on the flip side, as the prosecution argued, it can make you fragile. Someone who might lash out if they feel threatened, like their status is slipping.
And speaking of threatened, the prosecution really focused on an incident in Georgia back in 2005. This is almost a decade before the shooting. But it wasn't just any dog trial. This was Waynesboro. They call themselves the bird dog capital of the world.
Oh, wow. So it's a big deal.
Huge. And something went down with Mr. Jones there. Some kind of arrest. Apparently, he wasn't welcome back at future events. Details are a little thin in the transcripts, but it sounds serious.
Yeah, you don't get banned from the bird dog capital lightly.
Right. And what makes this even more interesting is this little detail. They renamed a dog. Panofsky Silver. Panofsky, being Mr. Jones's last name, this champion dog, suddenly became Belfield Silver.
Hold on. Belfield.
Belfield. As in Mr. Smith's company, Belfield.
Wow. Talk about a deliberate move. It's a small detail, renaming a dog, but it speaks volumes, like they're cutting ties, distancing themselves, and this is years before the murder.
Adds a whole other layer to their history, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
So let me get this straight. We have a man fixated on his legacy, a shady past incident, and a clear break between him and our victim years before the murder. It's like something out of a true crime novel, really.
Stranger than fiction, as they say.
So the prosecution is building this case, premeditation. They're trying to prove intent by laying out all of Mr. Jones' actions in the weeks before Mr. Smith was murdered. What really struck you? Like, what was really compelling in their argument? Or even questionable?
Well, they brought up some things Mr. Jones did that honestly seemed suspicious, like changing his license plates, tinting his car windows, and all just weeks before the shooting.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder.
It does. It feels like, trying to avoid identification 101, like he was getting ready for a getaway, straight out of a movie. But we know, real life, way more complicated. What about those internet searches the prosecution brought up? Those seemed pretty bad, didn't they?
Yeah, the internet searches. So they found searches for Western Union and Macedonia on Mr. Jones's computer. And guess what? They were from around the same time as the license plates and the window tinting.
Oh, so right in that same time frame where he's making these changes.
Exactly. And the prosecution's argument. Well, they said he was looking at ways to skip town after the murder.
And he does end up in Macedonia, right? Flew out just a few days after the shooting. It all seems to fit together.
It does.
All right, so let's put it all together. It's the day of the shooting. Mr. Jones tells his girlfriend, hey, I'm going goose hunting. Even has his shotgun. Drops her off. And then hours later, Mr. Smith is found dead. So, open and check case, Riley.
Well, not so fast. This is where things get interesting. The prosecution seemed to have a pretty good case so far, right? But now, the evidence from the day of the murder gets a little messy. We're talking eyewitness accounts now, people who saw the car near the crime scene. That's where it gets tricky.
Yeah, this is where it all starts to get a bit fuzzy, right? Because we have different people saying different things. Some say it was a Toyota Corolla, like the one Mr. Jones drove. Others, a Nissan Sentra. And the color. Forget about it. Blue, green, blue-green. It's all over the place.
This is exactly why eyewitness testimony is so tricky, especially in these really stressful, traumatic situations. The judge, he knew this. He actually spent a good chunk of his decision talking about how trauma, just a quick glimpse, even the time of day, it can completely change what someone remembers.
It's so easy for us to forget. We're here, calm, going over this information. But the people who were actually there, this was terrifying. They're scared, shocked. So how much can we really rely on those memories, especially when someone's life is on the line? What about, like, hard evidence, fingerprints, DNA?
You'd think that would be clear, but even that wasn't so simple in this case. They did find gunshot residue on the passenger seat of Mr. Jones's car.
Okay, so they did find something.
They did. But here's the catch.
Yeah.
The expert witness said that on its own. That doesn't mean he's guilty.
Really? I would think gunshot residue in his car would be pretty strong evidence.
It seems like it, right? But it turns out gunshot residue can transfer really easily. So if he really was shooting his shotgun earlier that day, goose hunting, like he said, that residue could have gotten his clothes, his hands, and then onto the car seat. It's circumstantial.
That makes sense. But what about tire tracks? They found those at the scene, right? Surely those would put Mr. Jones there. I mean, if he drove there.
Now, this is where it gets really interesting. So the forensic officer analyzed the tire tracks and Michoud. They didn't match Mr. Jones's Corolla.
Wait, how is that possible? That seems like a pretty big detail to miss.
Huge. It basically threw a wrench in the prosecution's whole case. And we're not talking about a small difference here. This officer, he used a laser measuring system. Really precise stuff. And even with a margin of error, the track width still didn't match Mr. Jones's car.
So what did the prosecution say about that? Did they try to explain that away?
They did. They said, well, maybe the tire track measurements weren't accurate, because of the condition of the tracks or whatever. But the judge, he wasn't buying it. It's almost like looking at puzzle pieces, E1 seems important on its own, but when you try to put them all together, it just doesn't quite fit.
So many questions, right? Conflicting stories about the car, evidence that's suggestive at best, and those tire tracks that just don't match up. Sounds like the prosecution's case had some holes in it. What did the judge do with all of that?
Well, with all those inconsistencies, the judge, he ultimately said, not guilty.
Not guilty. So does that mean he thought Mr. Jones was innocent?
Not necessarily.
Yeah.
He made it really clear that it wasn't about saying, oh, Mr. Jones definitely didn't do it. This all comes down to the burden of proof.
Yeah.
How our legal system works. Here in Canada, the prosecution, they have to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt.
Beyond a reasonable doubt. That's a lot tougher than just showing, oh, he probably did it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It means you have to eliminate any other reasonable explanation, not just show the most likely scenario. And the judge was very clear. The evidence in this case just didn't meet that standard.
It's like one of those movies, you're totally sure the guy did it, and then boom, this twist, he walks free. Not because they proved he was innocent, but because they couldn't eliminate that doubt.
Perfect comparison. And get this, it gets even wilder. Remember those tire tracks, the measurements that didn't match?
Yeah, how could I forget?
The judge brought those up too. Turns out they weren't disclosed when they should have been.
Wait, so that information was kept back?
Yep. And the judge, he wasn't happy about it. He said this wasn't just some minor procedural thing. This was evidence, potentially big evidence that could have helped the defense.
Wow. So if those measurements had come out earlier, who knows what could have happened? The whole trial, it could have been totally different.
Absolutely. And it shows just how crucial full disclosure is. Every little detail matters. Even something that seems small can change everything.
Makes you think about all those documentaries, those true crime stories. Someone gets convicted, and then years later, they're exonerated because some key evidence was hidden or missed.
Exactly. It's a reminder. The justice system. It's not perfect.
So true. And beyond all the legal arguments, the evidence, the whole courtroom drama, there's a real person at the heart of this.
Mr. Smith. His life was taken. His family, his friends, they're left with this horrible loss.
The judge, he acknowledged that. Throughout the decision, especially at the end, he talked about the tragedy of Mr. Smith's death. You could tell he really felt for the people who were hurting.
It's easy to get caught up in the evidence, the arguments, but it's important to remember the human cost. Always.
It's a good reminder for all of us, really. So, here we are. We dug into this case, looked at everything, heard the verdict. But do we really understand what happened?
That's the question, isn't it? Sometimes, even with all the information, the answers just aren't clear. But what we get from this deep dive is a better understanding of the law, how eyewitness testimony works, how important evidence is. It reminds us that things are messy, rarely black and white.
Yeah.
And justice. It doesn't always mean we get all the answers.
Definitely not. And sometimes it's those unanswered questions that really stick with you. So I'm going to ask you all the same thing I asked myself. If you were on that jury, knowing what you know now, what would you have decided? It's a lot to think about. We're out of time for today's deep dive, but we want to hear from you. Head over to our social media, let us know your thoughts. What really stood out? What questions are still swirling around in your head? And hey, if there's a case out there, something you think needs a deep dive, let us know. Until next time, keep those minds open and keep exploring.